Why People Tell Stories, a Romanian folktale. There were once 3 men traveling together. It was late in the year and it was cold out. There was a gale blowing and fresh snow covered the ground. They knew they needed to find an inn or house to stay in, and they saw a light in the distance. So they went toward it and found a cottage. They knocked on the door, and it was answered by an old woman who opened the door just a crack. And when she did, the men said, "Please let us in out of this storm. We'll gladly pay for our bread and a place by your fire." "I will have a story from each of you, and welcome," she said. "But if you have no story to tell, be gone with you." "Gladly," said the first man. "Gladly," said the second man. But the third man said nothing. They all went into her house and sat by the fire. Each man was wrapped in a blanket, and he had his boots off with his toes near the fire, trying to warm up. And the old woman served each of them a steaming bowl of porridge. Then she sat down in her chair and said, "I've kept my end of the deal. Now it's your turn." The first of the 3 men told his story first. It was a funny story about 2 rascals. And when he was done and the old woman finally caught her breath again after laughing so hard, she said, "I thank you kindly, and may God reward you." Then the second man told his story. It was a beautiful story about good Prince Stephen. And when he was done, the old woman wiped a tear from her eye and said, "I thank you kindly, and may God reward you." And then they all turned and looked expectantly at the third man, who just sat there. "What story will you tell us tonight?" He shrugged. "I have no story to tell." "Not even a short story?" "I have not a story in my head," he snapped. "Your grandmother never took you on her knee and told you any stories?" "I don't remember if she did," he replied. "I'm sure something's happened in your life. Tell us about that," she urged. "Look, I said I was happy to pay for my meal and this place by your fire. I don't understand why you have to make such a fuss about a silly story." "Well, if that's how you feel, get out of my house," the old woman cried. And so fast he couldn't even put on his shoes, she grabbed her broom and swept him out the door and bolted it shut behind him. And then the poor traveler found himself outside in the cold, shoes in hand. So he did what he had to do, and he walked until he found another house. He saw a light in the distance, and he went toward it, and he went up to the window, planning to knock on it. But when he looked in, he froze, not from cold, but with terror. What did he see? There was a man and a woman in bed with a huge snake coiled on the beam above their bed, its jaw open wide and venom dripping from its fangs into their open mouths. The traveler screamed and ran, tripping over himself, trying to get out of there, and he went to the next house he saw with light. And he went up to that window, hoping for something better, but when he got there, his heart hammered in his chest. What did he see? There was a man lying in his bed with an axe planted in his chest. And he ran again, screaming, trying to get away, his only thought of escape. And then he saw another light in the distance, so he went toward that. And when he got to the top of the hill, he saw the source of the light. It was 3 brilliant flames going round and round this house. The flames sent light into the sky and reflected off the snow, but he would not have been able to look in the window, never mind go into the house, because of the wall of flames. It was getting incredibly cold out, and he knew there was nothing else to do. So he went back to the old woman's house. And when he got there, he banged on her door and said, let me in, I'm the man with the story to tell. And when he got inside and he was sitting in front of the fire trying to warm up, when he finally caught his breath, he told his story to the old woman and his two companions of everything that had happened to him since he left the house. And the old woman said, thank you. I thank you kindly. May God reward you. Now listen, and listen well, she said. At that first house, you did not see a snake, but a belt. The foolish man had left the belt over the beam. You must never hang your belt up over a beam before going to bed. You must put it away. At the second house, you did not see an axe planted in a man's chest. What you saw was a warning from the axe. If you went around the back of the house, surely you would find that the foolish man had been cutting wood earlier and had left the axe in the chopping block instead of putting it safely away in the shed. But what of the third house? The man said. That was the strangest of all. Ah, yes, the third house. That was a house in which 3 people were sleeping, after each having told a story. The stories transformed into brilliant, fiery flames that protected the house from anyone who would come inside. And that's why, the woman concluded, when you tell a story, when you give the gift of a story to your host, you are doing a good deed. And the traveler always remembered the old woman's words. From then on, wherever he went, wherever he stayed the night, he asked his host for a story and told one in return before going to bed. And he told the same story every time. About the time when he was a man with no story.